so you don't need to be too sad. This little girl is still here, she still runs around, and she still likes to have a lot of fun. Seems to be her goal. She actually is an interactive spirit. She interacts mainly with children, but she interacts with adults as well, although she's seen more by children than by adults. And one of the things she likes to do is people up in this area especially, this seems to be the part she likes to hang out in here, in this section, and the staircase itself. She might poke you in the stomach here. You might get a little tug on your pants, your vest, your shirt or skirt. She does that to people up in this area quite a bit. You don't see her though, they just feel the little tug. And we think she's probably just trying to get some attention. Her mom and dad aren't here, so she just picks out random adults to look down and smile at when she does that. Now, people that stay in these rooms often report waking up in the middle of the night, and they'll see a little girl standing there, always in old-fashioned clothing. She just sort of stands there and looks at them. She doesn't do anything, she's not harmful. Now that would seem pretty creepy, I think. My theory is she just doesn't sleep. And so she's just kind of waiting for somebody to wake up. She can have a little fun with again. Now, women that stay in these rooms often report when they leave or they go to sleep, they come back and their jewelry or their makeup might be messed up a little. Sometimes their clothing. She's not a thief, she doesn't steal anything. She just likes to play dress up apparently, like most little girls do. Once again, her mom's not here, so she just picks random women, goes in there, and plays with their stuff instead. Now, as I said, she is interactive, and she does play with children. She'll go in there, in these rooms in here, and she'll sit on the floor and play with them, just like anybody else. She'll play Legos, dolls, whatever you got in there. Now, mom might come along and go, okay, time to pick up. We're going to go to eat dinner. We're going to go shopping or something like that. And the little kid will go, well, what about my friend? And mom will look down, there's no one there. She'll, who are you talking about? They say that little girl I was playing with, dressed in those funny clothes. She was just here. Mom doesn't get to see her. Now, mom might hear some laughing, giggling out in the hall, might hear some footsteps, catch a glimpse of a little girl running around the corner here. That's about as much as adults tend to get to see her. And but she is seen, as I said, running up and down the stairs here some. She gets hurt a lot, that. Her footprints hurt a lot. Now, people that take pictures here on the staircase often get a glimpse of a little face peeking out between the railings here. Very often. A woman on my tour last week was taking pictures before the tour. When I started telling the story, she started going through her phone quickly and showed me a face. It was a picture of the face of a little girl right about there, just staring between the railings. She said nobody was on the stair. I couldn't see anything behind the face there. I don't know if that's what it was, but that's why we refer to her as the little girl on the stairs. She's a fun little girl just looking to have a good time. Now, the next story I'm going to tell you takes place when this was a college and conservatory for women. We're talking about right about 100 years ago, right about the time of World War I. And because of the scandal involved in this, her family, the young lady's family, had sealed up the records. So we do not know her name. What we do know about her is she was 17 years old. She was a student here at the college and conservatory, and she found herself with child. Now, for a young lady back then, especially from a prominent family, to find herself with child, she faced a very bleak future. Her life completely would change at that point. She would have been totally dependent on her family, the charity of her family, if indeed they wanted to help her out. She would have rendered herself pretty much unmarriageable at that point. Not a big deal today, but back then, young ladies had to get married for economic reasons. They were just expected to. She would not have been able to keep the child, probably. And she wouldn't have been able to go out in what we call polite society, which would have been virtually anybody she knew before this incident. So she faced this very grim future. And we're not exactly sure what happened. We do know she left the third floor balcony here and fell to her death on the patio down there. Now, whether she chose to do this on her own or somebody pushed her, we don't know. What's generally seen in this particular one is about 10:30 at night or so, this is when the incident occurs, people will see a mist up on the third floor. The mist will descend down to the patio and just dissipate down there. Now, y'all can come on if you want. That's just fine, sure. Now, people that are close enough and can actually see into the mist have seen a woman's figure in there. They always describe her in old-fashioned clothes, which would have been about 100 years ago, and she's always holding her arms like this. Now, we think this is an indication of the fact she knew she was with child, or she was in some way trying to protect her child. We just don't know. Now, most people watch the mist descend, but if you keep your eye on the spot where the mist originated, a male figure is seen. Very dark, very shadowy, almost a silhouette, and it backs away from the railing once the mist leaves. We don't know who this is, just adds to the mystery a bit. This could have been the father of the child, maybe a faculty or staff member here at the college. Could have been a local man from town. May have been married, we don't know. It could have been a male relative of hers trying to talk her out of doing this. or perhaps talk her into jumping off there if indeed she did commit suicide, to avoid the scandal involved with it. So either way, whether a man was out there talking to her, it could have been basically to avoid a scandal, or they could have been trying to talk her into not doing that, to save her life. We don't know. So that fact, we don't know if she jumped or if she was pushed. It sort of remains a mystery there. We just know this incident actually did happen. Now you can see this painting down here up in the right-hand corner. The large building is the Crescent Hotel. Now it's taken to the Vantage Point of East Mountain. That's the mountain across the way. We're on the balcony and look at it. And this is called East Mountain Lookout here, where this little gazebo is. One night, one of our local policemen was sitting up there. Obviously, he wasn't working too hard. He was taking in the view and everything, staring at the Crescent Hotel, when he saw a woman in a white dress jump from the 3rd floor. He immediately radioed it in, said, "We need an ambulance and a car up at the Crescent. We just got to jump her up there. I'll be over there in a minute." It took him a few minutes to get here through all the winding streets and everything. When he got here, the ambulance was here, the other police car was here, and they asked, he came up and he said, "What happened? What did you find? Was it a local lady, a guest here at the hotel?" They said, "We didn't find anything." Now, the front desk had heard this story more than one time, and they knew that this was the lady in the mist. So one of our policemen had actually seen this happen as well. We're going to step out here on the balcony. I'll show you where the policeman's vantage point was. We're going to be above where this incident occurred, and I'll tell you another little story when we get out here. Over there, there's a little clearing with some lights in it. That's actually East Mountain Lookout. That's where the policemen are sitting. And y'all can find that in the wonders about Eureka. It's a great place to get an overview of the town. Opposite view that you got here. This is the best spot over here on this mountain. Looks like they're having a party or something over there, actually. Now, back in the day when this was a college for women, the girls that went here, as I said, all came from wealthy families. They were heavily chaperoned. They couldn't even go down to the drugstore for a soda without a chaperone. They couldn't write letters to anybody unless it was on a approved list their parents had submitted at the beginning of the semester. But you had about 100 young ladies from the age of 17 to 23 living here. You had a whole town full of local men, kind of bored maybe with some of the local ladies. And where there's a will, there's a way. So back in the day, there was a roving police system here on the balcony with a very large basket. And that's how they would get the laundry down and back up. Stop at every floor, dirty laundry would go in. When it would come back up, all the clean, crisply folded laundry would come back up. Stop at every one, come up on the appropriate floor. So the young ladies had an idea. So late at night, when all the faculty and staff was asleep here, we're talking probably past midnight, some of the young ladies would creep out here. They'd somehow gotten in touch with some of the local men, worked up a little signal, a whistle or something, and the young men would hide in the bushes. When they got the appropriate signal, the young men would climb into the laundry basket. They might throw a little laundry over their head for a little disguise, and the girls would haul them up. Their little catch of the day there. Now, the president of the college heard about this, Mr. Richard Thompson. Mr. Richard Thompson did not think this was such a good idea. So he hid down there in the bushes one night. Scared off the young man that was waiting down there. He gave the whistle. The young ladies responded. He climbed in the basket, and they started calling him up. Now, these young ladies didn't get to see young men too often, so they were pretty anxious young ladies, and they looked over to the side to see who was coming up. Now, imagine their horror when they saw the face of the president of the college looking back up at them. And what do you think they did?
Dropped the basket.
Absolutely they did. They let go of the ropes, ran back to the room, pretended like they'd been asleep for hours. And Mr. Thompson, basket and dirty laundry, all went tumbling down to the ground. Now, apparently he wasn't too high up because all that happened was he got a sprained ankle, some cuts and some bruises. But that did end the midnight gentleman callers for the young ladies here at the Crescent. Now we're going to go back in the hallways. We're going to go down outside the second most requested room in the hotel. This is the second most requested room because it is the second most active room in the hotel. It's also known as Miss Theodora's room. If y'all will follow me, please. There is a step down here at the end of the hallway.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, please. Oh, shucks, thanks.
Just go on it. I thought that was not that big out there.
That's like one of them patios.
All right. Let's stir fun.
Drop something.
Here, we've got some room right here. We may have to part ways if somebody needs to get in a room. Remember, this is a functioning hotel. Occasionally, we got to move so people can walk through. Now, as I said, this is known as Miss Theodora's room. Now, you can tell there's no number or handle here. There's nothing too strange about that. This room became so popular, it was eventually turned into a suite. This room was boarded off for privacy, entrances around that way. Pretty normal in that respect. Now, this takes place, the woman that was here lived here at the time Mr. Baker had his cancer curable hospital here, late 1930s. This staircase actually leads up to one of the penthouses. It's now for rent, but that's where Mr. Baker lived. That was his apartment up there. And because he destroyed the records, we're not real sure what Miss Theodora did here. Because of her proximity to Mr. Baker's apartment, we think she was probably a little higher up on the staff than just the average employee. Maybe head of housekeeping, head of nursing, something like that. Miss Theodora is seen occasionally. She's a bit interactive, not a lot though, but her presence is felt more than anything in her room. When Miss Theodora is seen, she's seen standing right in front of this door, which was the entrance to her old room. Now, she's a woman, very slightly built lady, probably in her mid-50s, is what we guess from the reports we've had, and she's always looking through her purse. And she seems to be a bit agitated, sometimes frustrated. People have often asked if they could help her. Ma'am, are you okay? Can we help you with something? She'll just look up and give them a smile and say, I'm just looking for my keys in this darn purse. She goes back to digging in her purse, and she just disappears. And that's pretty much the extent of Miss Theodora's, of seeing Miss Theodora. But now Miss Theodora does like things done a certain way in her room. If she doesn't like people staying in there, for a variety of reasons, she'll let it be known. She's not mean or vindictive. She doesn't hurt anybody, but she does let it be known she'd rather they were not in her room. Also, if people do stay in her room, whether she cares for them there or not, she's a very neat and tidy lady. And if you're not particularly neat and tidy guest, she's got no problem. She'll neatly tidy up after you there. That's what she's well known for in this room. Now, she's also a lady of her times, which would be the late 1930s. If a man and lady stay in this room, she would prefer that they were married. If they're not married, she lets her displeasure be known. We had a couple that stayed in here one night. They were getting married the very next day here at the Crescent Hotel. They came in, unpacked their bags, and they each had a special outfit they were going to wear for their wedding. The bride, of course, had a lovely dress. Groom, I assume, had a nice outfit he was going to wear, and they hung them carefully in the closet. Now, they've been having a little spat, we're not real sure what, wedding jitters or something like that. So they decided to go out and have dinner, a couple of drinks, glasses of wine, and calm down a bit, which is apparently what happened. Everything was good. They came back up here, had a little trouble opening their door, like something was on the other side of it. They eventually got it pushed open, and what they found was his suitcase was packed with all of his clothes, her suitcase was packed with all of her clothes. They were right up against the door, and the outfits they were going to wear at their wedding that they hadn't had yet, taken off the hangers and thrown in a heap by the floor. Miss Theodora was not happy about this, and she was not having this in her room, thank you very much, before the wedding happened. Now, people come in here after shopping and stuff, empty out their pockets, go off into another part of the room, come back. Miss Theodora might clean up after them. She might stack your coins up, all your dimes all together, all your quarters together, all your nickels together, your paper money all in a nice little pile together, very efficiently and neatly done. You go in the bathroom, spread out your toiletries and your makeup. She doesn't like it like that. She's going to organize them for you back in an efficient, neat way. She's even been known to rehang the way people hang the clothes in their closet. Now, are any of you here familiar with the TAPS television program? It was a paranormal investigative show, and they came to the Crescent, and of course their whole thing is to debunk things they find out like this. So they came here, and one of the rooms they wanted to stay in was this room. They'd heard so much about the activity in this room. Very similar story. They came in, unpacked all their ghost finding equipment and their electromagnetic readers, their thermal imaging cameras and all this, put everything over there by the fireplace on the opposite side of the room. One of them realized he needed his laptop, so he came back up here. Same scenario, had trouble getting through the door. When he finally pushed it open, all the equipment had been moved from that side of the house, right in front of the door over there, stacked nice and neatly. Miss Theodora did not want them poking and prodding around her room. She was ready for them to leave, so she packed up everything for them to go. That's what Miss Theodora likes to do in there. I've had several guests on my tours tell me the very same story. So if you're looking for a carefree, sloppy vacation, you don't like to clean up after yourself, this might be the room you want, because Miss Theodora will take care of that end of it for you. And I always like to say, of all the spirits here in the hotel, she's the one I'd most likely like to bring home for a few days. I've got 6 rooms at my place she can tackle and go to town on. All right, we're going to head down to the 3rd floor now. Now, the 3rd floor, I'm going to start telling you all some creepy stories about. So that's going to happen as soon as we get down here. All right. You can line up on the walls right here. Even right here is fine. This will be the space I'm talking about here. Now, when the Crescent was originally built, they forgot something. All these people, as I said, were of the upper crust. They were of the carriage set, it was called back then. And a lot of these people had servants they brought with them. The ladies had ladies' maid, gentlemen had valets. If you brought your children, you had a governess or nanny to watch them. They didn't have any place for the servants to stay. So eventually, after the Crescent was built, they built this little 3-story annex on there. And this is where the servants were able to stay, and a number of the staff lived there as well. When this became a college and conservatory for young ladies, this was the music conservatory out there. It was one of the main focuses of study here. All young ladies, especially society ladies, were expected to be able to play an instrument and to be able to sing, entertain their guests and all. So that's where all this went on. They had 26 pianos out here. They had violins, all different instruments for the young ladies to learn, and they'd have their voice practice and everything out here. Now, when Mr. Baker took over in 1937, and he had his cancer curable clinic, and by the way, he did guarantee he would cure you 100%. Within 6 weeks, he would cure your cancer. That was one of the promises he made. As far as we know, even though he destroyed all the records, his success and cure rate here was 0. As far as we know, he did not cure anybody here. Nobody that came here was actually cured of their cancer. That's why we have to have a morgue down on the lower level, which is where the tour will end up down there. But anyhow, when Mr. Baker took over, this became a much more sinister place. He had the windows boarded up out here, and he had 2 reinforced steel doors installed here. The reason he did this was to keep sound in there. Now here's why. When people came here in various stages of cancer, if you were in a later stage of cancer, you might already be in pain from the disease itself. Mr. Baker had one form of therapy he gave people. That was his secret formula number 5, which he actually stole from somebody. But his secret formula number 5, he would inject into the people up to 7 times a day at the point of their tumor. These injections themselves were very painful in their own right. His secret formula number 5 consisted of ground watermelon seeds, rose petals, corn silk, peppermint, glycerin, water from the springs here, and something called carbolic acid. Now, carbolic acid sounds pretty awful, and carbolic acid you can actually find in some mouthwashes and all, but you spit your mouthwash out. It's not meant to go into the human body, and it certainly wasn't meant to be injected into the human body. So you have these very painful things, and Mr. Baker did not believe in using any type of pain relief either. Back then, morphine and laudanum were used to treat pain and cancer and other diseases. He didn't. He thought the power of positive thinking was all they needed. They needed to do these mental exercises he gave them, sort of think your pain away. Now that can be all good and fine and dandy, certainly nothing wrong with positive thinking, but in this particular case, not so much. So you have these people here in pain from their disease, in pain from the treatment they were getting, and absolutely no pain relief. Well, of course, eventually they're going to start moaning or even crying out in pain. Now, when you have a cancer clinic where you've guaranteed everybody's going to be cured, you cannot have people laying around in pain, upsetting the other patients, prospective patients. And at this point in his life, he was so notorious, he often had reporters snooping around and various law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, keeping their eye on him. So the patients that were making pain, this is where they go. He called this his asylum, behind the steel doors so nobody could hear them moaning in pain. If anybody asked what happened to, say, Mrs. Jones down on the 2nd floor, he would say, she lost her mind. It was too much for her. She couldn't do her mental exercises properly, and the cancer caused her to lose her mind. So for her own protection, we put her into the asylum behind the steel doors. Now, of course, this wasn't true at all. This was for the protection of his reputation. People went behind the doors here. And unfortunately for many of these people, if not most of them, this would be their last stop before they went down to the morgue. Now, people that stay in these rooms report hearing at about 3:30 in the morning wheels on a wooden floor. Back in the days, this was a hospital. They didn't have the carpeting, it was the hardwood floors. And if any of them look out, what they see is they've always described it as a woman in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform. She's pushing a gurney. And on the gurney is a body, and there's a sheet draped over the body. She starts down here, and she goes all the way down the hall to the elevator, where she dissipates down there. Now, people have tried to get her attention, and she's like the lady in the mist. She's what we call like a reoccurring haunting. It's the same thing over and over again, sort of the same scenario played out. And she's not interactive with people at all. Just this sort of same thing happens. It's stuck in the fabric of time or something, if you will, and it's always the same. And so as she's pushing her gurney, people have tried to talk to her, wave their arms in front of her, even yell at her to get her attention. She never acknowledges it. She just continues on her grim journey with a very stoic look on her face down to the elevator. Now, 3:30 in the morning seems like a really strange time to be removing bodies, but remember, everybody was cured that came here. So you had to remove the bodies when nobody could see it, certainly not the other patients, prospective patients, snooping reporters, anything like that. So it was always about 3:30 in the morning when they'd remove them, and that's when the nurse is always seen here. Now, we started off here having the servants' quarters, then we had this asylum for pain. The next logical step would be to turn this into the Honeymoon Suites, and that's exactly what happened here. A few years ago, they remodeled here, and they made some luxury suites there, and those are the Honeymoon Suites. First couple to stay there were our general manager, Jack Moyer, and his then wife, Misty. Misty woke up twice in the middle of the night, and she said, "Jack, there's a woman standing at the foot of our bed." Jack didn't see anything and told her to go back to sleep. Second time it happened, he's like, "Honey, you're dreaming." She said, "I don't care if I'm dreaming or not. I see a woman standing there, and we are not going to stay in this room. Call to the front desk, get us a different room." That's what happened. They spent their honeymoon night in a different room, not in the suite there. Now, a couple of years later, we had another couple staying in there. They'd been out shopping that day. It was their honeymoon day. And she was modeling the new clothes for her husband. He was taking pictures of her. And when they got the pictures back, this was before everybody had a cell phone, they actually used a real camera, they got the film developed, and they found something rather surprising in the pictures, one of the better photos we have here. And they brought it back here to the Crescent, showed it to the people at the front desk, and said, "Look what we found." The people at the front desk said, "We have got to show this to Jack and Misty." Jack and Misty were having lunch in the dining room at that point, so they took it in there. Misty took one look at the picture, and she said, "That is the woman that was standing at the foot of our bed in the honeymoon. We refer to this lady as the woman in white, and we're not really sure who she is. I will show you this picture." Now, they ask us to conceal the bride's identity, so she's the figure in red in the middle of the picture. But if you look over to the right-hand side of the television, which was not on at the time, you'll see an upside-down figure of a woman. You can flip the page over, and she's blown up a little bit. And this is the woman people describe when they stay in these rooms there. And we're not, as I said, sure who she is, but if you look, she appears to have a nightgown on. So we tend to think she was probably a patient, and she was probably there in the asylum. She doesn't interact much either with people. She just looks at them with this very sad, mournful look on her face, and that's about the extent of it. She just stands there looking at them, which leads us to believe she was probably a patient in the asylum that had been put there by Mr. Baker. Now, that doesn't sound like it'd be very romantic if you were on your honeymoon, but people book this room in hopes that she will show up in the middle of the night and they can see her and snap a picture of her. Now, we're going to move down to the second floor. We'll continue passing the picture around. When we get down there, if you haven't seen it yet, just raise your hand. We'll make sure you get a look at it. Also, if you want to look at this picture and others we have further, down in the lobby on the coffee tables, we have some binders like this, and you can go down there after the tour tomorrow so and peruse them at your leisure, all right? If you'll follow me down to the second floor. Any building in Eureka, you're going to find that. Oh, they're all built on the sides of the mountain. My house is 120 years old, and if you spill something, it doesn't stay in a puddle. It runs to one side and the other. Whole town is like that. People do notice that. You can even see the doors over the loft are quite square. That's pretty standard as everything settles over the years. And this being about 130 years old now, that was 70. Now, people that stay in this room, and this young gentleman has the photograph now. If you want to see it, just raise your hand or ask me later on and we'll let you see it. Along in this part of the hall, people report hearing a little boy. He runs up and down the hall and he bounces his ball. Sometimes he goes on the staircase here. And he's heard saying, "It's not fair, it's not fair." We know who this little boy is. This is little Brecky Thompson. He's the son of the president of the college that was here about 100 years ago. That's the gentleman, Richard Thompson, in the laundry basket. It's his son. And Brecky lived here with his mother, who also taught here at the college. Her name was Mary Breckenridge Thompson. She was a very fascinating historical figure in her own right, and I could elaborate on her story forever and ever. But what happened was she eventually got a postage stamp dedicated to her by our country. She's known as the mother of American midwifery. And after both of her children died, she went over to Europe, studied, she was already a trained nurse, studied midwifery, came back, and taught a bunch of women here in the United States. Her most important contribution was introducing sterile birth methods to the United States. Before then, a lot of children and women were lost in childbirth. She helped change that a lot. Even most doctors weren't using sterile birth methods back then. She realized the importance of this to her study, brought it back here to the United States, and she and her women introduced this to our country, which helped the survival rate of children and women in childbirth. And that had become her goal in life after she lost both of her children, was to help other women have healthy, happy children. But when Mary lived here with her son and her husband, when little Brecky was 3 years old, he had a sister. The little girl only lived for about 6 hours. About a year after that, 10 days after his 4th birthday, Brecky too died. He had appendicitis and some infections, and he did not live. So both of her children died within a very short period of time. This devastated her and her husband, of course. It actually ended their marriage. And that's when she took off for Europe. It was right after World War I ended. And she went to France to help the mothers over there that had been devastated by the war with their children. Taught prenatal nutrition, child welfare, how women could keep themselves healthy and how they would get their babies healthy. Very important woman in the history of our country. A lot of people don't know about her, though. But it's her son that we're concerned with here, little Brecky. And little Brecky runs up and down the hall, and little Brecky bounces his ball, and little Brecky will play with other children. He loves to play ball with other children. Children have reported playing ball with him here, bouncing, rolling, catching. He doesn't seem to care. He even goes out in the garden. He's not exclusive to this area, and he'll play out there. Kids will be playing with him. He'll go off somewhere and disappear, and they come running in once again. Anybody else need to see this? And he'll come in, they'll ask at the front desk, "Have you seen that little boy in his strange clothes? We were playing ball with him and having a good time, and he just ran off." They know who he's talking about. That's little Brecky Thompson. Go grab a ball if you got one, roll it, throw it, bounce it. Little Brecky will be there with you in a minute. Now, we're not sure why Brecky runs around saying it's not fair. We think because we actually have pictures of Brecky. He's in some of the annuals and yearbooks when this was a college here. And one of the outfits he wore, they dressed little boys up in frou-frou clothes back then, just like little girls, was a blue velvet outfit they talk about. And I tend to think maybe it was one of these hot, humid summer Ozark days, and he was forced to wear that blue velvet suit. Certainly that wouldn't seem fair to him. Also, he was the only child that lived in a building with 140 adults. That may not have been too fair to him, too. We're not sure why, because he was a spoiled little boy, and he was doted on by everybody here, the students and the faculty here at the college. They wrote really nice things about him in the annuals and yearbook, so we got a little bit of history of Brecky going on here. Now, Brecky's like the little girl on the staircase. Apparently, he doesn't sleep. And at night, what he would do was he would travel down to the laundry room, and he would mess things up down there. And the ladies would come in every day to start their work, and they'd have to clean up after whatever mess he'd made first. So finally somebody got the brilliant idea of buying a ball and setting it down there. They leave it in a certain place every night, and every morning now, apparently it's moved to a different spot, but the laundry room's never messed up anymore. Apparently the ball occupies Brecky. He doesn't have to go out and make a big mess of things anymore. So that's little Brecky's story. Now we're going to go around the corner here. We're going to go outside room 218. 218 is the most active room in the hotel. It is the most requested room in the hotel, and it is known as Michael's room. Now, Michael and his room are pretty much ground zero for the hauntings here at the Crescent Hotel. Michael was a 17-year-old boy. He was a member of one of those Irish families that came down here from St. Louis to help on the construction of the Crescent. He was a stonemason. And Michael, like a lot of 17-year-old boys, loved to flirt with the ladies. And he was pretty sure all the ladies were going to love him back too. And that eventually led to Michael's death, actually. He was up, this was in 1885, Crescent was about half completed. He was up on the very top doing something up there. He saw some young lady in the garden, just knew he had to get her attention so she would fall as much in love with him as he had with her. So he started waving, carrying on, yelling for her, and he misstepped and he fell. And he fell all the way down, landed on a beam in what eventually became this room. And that was his death. Now, people that stay along in here often report hearing a big loud thump. They say it sounds like a bag of cement being dropped on the ground. We think that's a reoccurrence of Michael's death. But Michael is much, much more than that. Michael is what we call a poltergeist. He is a loud, noisy ghost, and he does a lot of things. A lot of the things you associate with typical hauntings, Michael does some of that. Curtains will move when there's no breeze. Lights come on and off a lot. Objects disappear. Objects even fly across the room in here. But Michael still saves most of his attention for the ladies because he likes to flirt with them. Really doesn't matter your age either. Young, middle-aged, a little bit older, senior citizens, he likes to flirt with them all. And ladies love to stay in this room. They request this room a lot. People have waited up for 2 years to get a booking in this room so they can spend the night in there with Michael. Girls' weekend out, a lot of time this is the room they want and everything. And Michael rarely fails to deliver. Women that stay in here report having maybe a gentle hand reach out and stroke them on the arm, maybe rub their face or their hair, something like that. Women have reported putting their makeup on in the mirror. They see a man's face over their shoulder. Turn around real fast. No one's there. It's Michael, watching him get dolled up for the evening. Now, as I said, Michael's 17. He can be a little cheeky and a little fresh. And one of his most common things he likes to do in here, people report this all the time, or when ladies are taking a shower in there, the shower curtain might just come flying open all of a sudden. That's Michael, looking to get a peek at the merchandise or something. Now, if this happens, I always tell my guests, get out of the shower fast, because the next thing he usually does is start messing with the faucets. He'll turn the hot water off, and you get splashed completely with cold water, which of course would make you yell and squeal and jump out of the shower real fast. Apparently the reaction Michael is looking for. Now, Michael also likes to pay attention to gentlemen, but not so much in the same way. Gentlemen report when they stay in this room, they're getting ready to go to bed, the covers will come flying off the bed, and they describe what feels like a foot in the middle of their back, trying to push them out of the bed like that. Michael's the star of the show in here. Doesn't want any competition, apparently. I had some people on my tour. I was telling these stories, and they'd been having a little fun before the tour. They were doing okay, but they were kind of loud and boisterous, not too obnoxious. And I started telling these stories. The lady immediately tried to convince her husband to stay down on one of the couches in the lobby that night. She thought it would be fun to stay in here with Michael all alone. Husband was having absolutely nothing to do with that at all, though. He said, "No, ma'am, I will be by your side the entire evening." And even my grandparents, they actually spent their honeymoon here back in the 1920s, and they had heard stories about Michael, the construction worker that was killed during the construction of the Crescent, and how he still roams the hall here. So I've been hearing about Michael really my whole entire life, and that's a good long while. So chronologically, Michael would be close to 150 at this point, but he still acts like a 17-year-old boy when he's in there. So we can't guarantee anything, but if you want a little activity, this might be the room for you, because everybody that stays in there has some little story to tell. We're going to move down the hall just a little bit now. Now, when the Crescent was originally built, Mr. Paul Clayton, the man that built it, had a family physician, Dr. Ellis. He invited Dr. Ellis to be the house physician here at the Crescent. This was Dr. Ellis's office. Now, mostly when we pick up on things from Dr. Ellis, it's a smell, it's a scent. Back in the day, even when I was a young man, a good long while ago, but not that long ago, if you went into a doctor's office to be examined, they might be smoking in the examination room. I don't know if there's anybody here old enough to remember that. That might sound absolutely abhorrent to you all, and it kind of is abhorrent. But back then, the doctor would have a cigarette dangling out of his mouth, come over, blow smoke in your face, wonder why you're coughing so much. Nurses would be out in the reception room smoking. We didn't really think much about it back then. And apparently back in the 1880s, that went on a lot too, because Dr. Ellis smoked quite a bit in there. And what people smell in this area of the hallway, and frequently in his room, is this very sweet-smelling tobacco, or cherry tobacco. That's what Dr. Ellis liked to smoke in his pipe a lot. And of course, the Crescent's a non-smoking hotel now, so when people pick up on tobacco smells, it's very noticeable. And Dr. Ellis is seen occasionally too. Dr. Ellis was a very brilliant man. In addition to being a physician, he was also an engineer. And he designed the water and sewer system for this town that with a few tweaks we're actually still using today. Now, if you leave the Crescent parking lot, first house on your right is the Ellis House, currently under renovation right now. That's where Dr. Ellis lives. And when Dr. Ellis is seen, he's seen floating through the door, across the hall to the elevator, floats through there. When he's finished doing whatever it is he's doing, he floats back and floats right back through the door, like you'd see on a movie or something, a ghost doing that. And I say floats because Dr. Ellis is not seen with his legs. He's always just seen from the waist up. Always in his full Victorian regalia, got his top hat, waistcoat, vest on, mutton chop sideburns, that type of stuff, but he doesn't have his legs. And we don't know why. We do know at the time of his death he had both of his legs, and both of his legs were functional. What happened was, one night, somebody came up to Dr. Ellis's house and said, "One of your buildings downtown is on fire." Dr. Ellis jumped up and ran down to his building. Now, in a little twist of irony there, the water system he designed wasn't working properly that night, and the building ended up being burned down to the ground. But before that happened, Dr. Ellis, standing in the street in front of it watching it burn, got so agitated, so upset, he actually had a heart attack and he died right there in the middle of the street in front of his burning building. And I tell you that because he did have his legs, they were functional, he just doesn't show up with them anymore. So if you see a guy floating around here with no legs, smoking a cherry tobacco pipe, tell him to put it out. He's a doctor, and the Crescent's non-smoking now, and he needs to change his ways. Back then it wasn't, though. So we need to go down to the first floor. If you follow me, please. Took over here in 1937 and turned this into his cancer curable clinic. This was his third cancer curable clinic he had. The one before this had not ended well for him. He'd had death threats made against him, and he'd actually had the lobby shot up by someone. So when he came here as a first line of defense, this was his front office, he had bulletproof glass installed here. Around the corner there, it's now the governor's suite, was his back office. In there, he had 2 Tommy guns hanging on the walls in there. Now, those of you too young to know, Tommy guns like these little automatic machine guns that gangsters used to use back in the 1930s. Of course, this was the 1930s, and he had some in there. That was sort of his second line of defense. Something interesting he had in there too was he had this big 6-sided desk made. In addition to his clinics, he also had legitimate businesses. He was a very good businessman, made a lot of money legitimately too. And so this big 6-sided desk, each section represented a different business, sort of like an early computer, very organized, everything was in its place there. Now as we step further into the lobby, I will show you, we have 3 sections of that desk left. It's the concierge desk now. The other 3 sections, we don't know what happened, they disappeared a few decades ago. But we'll walk over here, and that is actually Mr. Baker's desk there. And right here we have a bronze sculpture of Michael, the young man in room 218 that likes to flirt with the ladies so much. This was done by one of our local artists, Mel Shipley. Mel's got him with his stoneworking equipment there. He's up on a crescent moon, of course. And around the base, on this back side, you can't see it too well, is a figure of a woman. I asked Mel what the woman was doing there, what she represented. And he said that represents Michael's mother. She's trying to guide him up to heaven. Obviously, she hadn't been too successful so far, because Michael's still here hanging out so forth with all you ladies and keeping me employed. So eventually, I hope she does get him up there. I hope she's successful. Maybe not for a few years, though, until I'm ready to retire. Now, we're going to step out front. We'll gather here by the fountain, and we're going to head down to the front. Sure. You all can get up. Just put it down by the fountain. And you can look up at our chimneys there, and you can see they have a bit of a lavender tinge to them. That's one of the peculiarities about Mr. Baker. When he took over here, he built that into color. We call it a power color, and he's an egomaniac anyhow. And so when he had purple around him, he felt that gave him strength in him. He was always seen, he's the one that played the instrument out there, I gave you a demonstration of. He always wore a white suit. He had a purple shirt, purple tie, purple shoes. When he took over the Crescent, with the exception of the lobby, which he painted like a kaleidoscope of gaudy colors, he painted the walls and the rooms all lavender and various shades of purple. And he even painted the chimneys purple. And 80 years later, that's the legacy we still have. There's still a bit of purple left on the chimneys up there. We're going to head down this way now, down into the morgue, if you'll follow me, please. Now this part, of course, is the annex that was added on as servants' quarters and then became the Conservatory for music and then became the asylum for the pain patients. When we go in here, we are going to go into the admittance room of the morgue. The morgue used to take up almost the whole lower level. We've just got these 3 small sections left yet as practical reasons have encroached upon it there. When we go in, there'll be some chairs and some benches. Please just take a seat. Now, of course, they didn't know we're going to be doing ghost tours here or anything like that, but these 3 rooms that we've got left here are, thank you, sir, are pretty much left unchanged. They've done some improvements for safety's sake, but this is probably what they looked like, very similar back in the day when Mr. Baker had his morgue here. I'm trying to get this set up. I'm going to show you about a 3-minute film clip in a moment. Now, when the Crescent was originally built, the lower level here were the kitchens. When Mr. Baker took over in 1937, he moved the kitchen upstairs. We may hear noises from the kitchen staff. Don't be too upset about that. That's probably just them up there. And this whole area became the morgue down here. Now, if you'll turn behind you on the wall behind you, is the actual original sign that hung out front, Cancer Curable Baker Hospital. I always think it's interesting to note the most corroded word on there is the word curable. I think even Mother Nature, weathering the sign, was trying to warn people things weren't so kosher up in here anyhow. But this is a picture of Mr. Baker here. We have various glamour shots of him here. Mr. Baker was born in the town of Muscatine, Iowa in 1882. When he was 19 years old, he joined the vaudeville circuit. During that phase, he worked in The Mentalist, the mind reader act. And in that capacity, I think he learned how to work a crowd. He also learned how to read people really well. He did that kind of act where he would look at you and go, I can tell you what's in your pocketbook. And from your facial reactions, he might get a good idea of what you know, yes or no, what's in there, that type of stuff he did. Now, when he was 28 years old, the year was 1910, that instrument that I played a bit sample for you up there called a calliophone, he actually invented that. It replaced something called a calliope. Calliopes made the same type of sound, were very big, very cumbersome, hard to move. They were operated by steam, dangerous. People got burned a lot. His was much smaller, much more mobile, operated by pressurized air. Nobody got burned. They were an instant hit, very popular. And in the teens, as I said, it was 1910 when he invented that. Within the teens, up until about 1920, they were cranking them out all the time. Like he had his factory was going 24 hours a day to do that. He made over $1.5 million off that invention. Now that's back then. So you can just imagine nowadays, you multiply that by about 15 or 20 times to see the dollar amount these days. He was a self-made millionaire by the time he was 30. Very successful man. But he didn't rest on his laurels there. He went out and invested in other businesses. In Muscatine, he had grocery stores, beauty shops. He had a mail order catalog. And he even had his first cancer curable clinic he opened in 1932 in a converted roller rink. And he had a radio station. That was the crown jewel of his holding. His radio station was KTNT, Know the Naked Truth. And Mr. Baker was a talk radio show person. He would get up there at night and rant and rave on the radio. His frequent target would be the established medical community, whom he despised, whom he thought was a bunch of con artists, who he thought already had a cure for all of these diseases everybody was crying about, and they just were trying to bilk people out of money. That was his thought process. He's the one that had the cure, though. His secret formula number 5. You'd come to his cancer curable hospitals, he'd be able to cure you. Now, one night on the air, he said a word that was forbidden. Commonplace today, nobody even blink an eye at it. It was a part of the male anatomy, sounds like the word spectacle. That was forbidden back then by the censors. He got in trouble, got his license pulled, and they started coming down on him for other stuff. So he left Muscatine, went all the way down to Mexico, a town called Laredo Nuevo. Opened another cancer curable clinic down there. Bought another radio station. At the time, this radio station was the second most powerful radio station on the North American continent. When he would broadcast at night, people could hear him throughout the United States, as far away as the Aleutian Islands in northern Canada. People knew who he was. He was a celebrity, which also helped him to convince people that he was legitimate in what he was doing. Now, he had a little trouble down there in Mexico. That's where he had death threats made against him. The lobby got shot up. He decided it'd be a good idea to leave. And that's when he came up here, 1937, the height of the Great Depression, bought the Crescent Hotel for $40,000 and opened his cancer curable clinic here. Now, one of the things he did when he was here was he would send out flyers trying to recruit new patients. We have some facsimiles on the back of the store here. On those flyers, he guaranteed he would cure your cancer within about 6 weeks, 100% guaranteed. This was not true. This constituted mail fraud. And they busted him on 7 counts of mail fraud. Tried him in federal court in Little Rock, found him guilty, and he went up to Leavenworth Penitentiary for a 4-year stay. Actually only stayed a little bit over 3 years. Here's the last shot we have of him, up in the upper right-hand corner. That's his mug shot as they put him into Leavenworth Penitentiary. Now, he was there a little over 3 years, got out, went to Muscatine. They didn't want anything back to do with him in Muscatine. So he took all the money, remember, he carried all his money, and he made millions in these little lock boxes of his, went down to Florida, bought a 3-story boat, lived off the coast of Miami until 1958. 1958 is when he died. Anybody want to venture a guess what killed him? Cancer. Absolutely, it was cancer. He died of cancer of the liver. And from what information we have, he actually used pain relief on himself, something he did not afford his patients here. Now, actually, when they took him back to Muscatine for his funeral, 4 people came to his service. You may have noticed up in our lobby we have an oval portrait of an orange cat up there. That's Morris the cat, who was the head hotel cat here from 1973 to 1994. Morris is still seen, of course, usually by children again. So if you see an orange cat up there in the lobby, that is Morris. He left us in 1994. You feel something rub up against your leg, you look down, there's no cat. That'll be Morris. Morris was very popular, became a local celebrity when he lived here. We currently have a cat. You see a black and white cat. That's Jasper. He's been here for a few years looking out for things. But when Morris died here, he was so beloved by the town here, they had a funeral for him. 50 people showed up for Morris's funeral. So there's a nice little comparison there. The cat got 50, Mr. Baker got 4, and I'm sure those were relatives that were just obligated to go to his funeral there. So one of the strange things Mr. Baker did during the last of his stay here was when people did die, he would take them into the autopsy room and have his staff do a dissection on them. They would remove the tumor and the accompanying tissue or organ, and they put it in jars of formaldehyde. And they displayed it on the room next to us called the parts room. We're not sure why he did this. One of the theories is if there was any deterioration on the tumor, he could take credit for that. The fact that the patient died, that was their fault. They weren't doing their mental exercises. They weren't doing the power of positive thinking. They weren't giving the strength to it they needed to fight the disease. His cure was working, secret formula number 5, because you can see the deterioration on the tumor. That's just one of the explanations. We're not sure why he did this. We are going to go in that room, and there are jars on the walls there. They're no body parts. They were here 80 years ago. They're long gone. Those are just props in there. Now, when the TAPS television show, the paranormal investigators came here, they found something really interesting in that room, something that they could not explain. no logical explanation. Their whole point is to come and debunk things like this and find out. And when they can't, then they're always very happy that there's actually something going on. And that's what they found in this room. I'm going to show you about a little 3-minute film clip of what they found there, and then we're going to go in there ourselves.
This is the room that was filled with jars of formaldehyde, body parts.
While me and Grant were checking out the morgue with the thermal camera, noticed something odd that I just had never seen before.
You better just rewind quickly.
I immediately asked Grant to rewind the tape so I could see what we had caught on the thermal imaging camera. And upon him rewinding it, I could see a figure. I could see a figure standing right there in the door next to us.
No shit. When Jay said rewind the tape, I was expecting a flash or something.
Holy crap. Oh my gosh, that's freaking me out.
Normally when we catch something on the thermal imaging camera, it's not very impressive.
Oh my gosh, hang on, I gotta look at that again before I start looking out.
But there, staring us down, was this figure that was no more than 2 feet away from me. And honestly, it gave me chills. That kind of stuff just doesn't happen very often. It's the holy grail for us investigators. And to know that it happened right next to me really kind of freaked me out.
Hey, does it look like a hat? Oh, he's wearing a hat. There's the brow on the hat.
I really wasn't sure if it was an apparition or a Grant's reflection.
Do you think that's maybe my reflection, Jay?
The image that showed up was so clear that I thought it's got to be one of us.
Let's just make sure that that's not my reflection.
We immediately set about trying to make a reflection in that locker.
I was right about here.
Yeah.
You see me? No, what?
Oh my gosh, I'm not there. We opened up the locker in case someone was inside, but there's no way someone could have ever stood inside it. It's just a bunch of shelves in there.
That's you.
On camera.
All right.
Put it on the thing again.
It's gone now.
There's the 2.
Right there.
Why was the 2 hot?
I don't know. Me and Grant were looking at the locker, and we kept seeing the 2 glowing red. There's really no reason why that 2 should be red.
All right, look at the Jim. It's in black. Maybe they knew it contained heat. I'm trying to think of anything. No, it's freaking spray painted white.
At first, I thought it was Grant's reflection, but it turns out it wasn't. It's something we've never caught or seen before. But we really need to analyze it and try to understand it before we present it as evidence. Do we?
Okay. So that's what the professional investigators found when they were here. We're going to go in that room next. There is a little step up here, be careful. And there's a little step down as we go into the parts room. Now, the locker in question will be to your left with the 2 still spray painted on it. The room beyond that is the autopsy room, which is where we're going to gather after you all been in here for a moment, all right? These next 2 rooms are a great opportunity for photos. Even if you want some souvenir photos of your family or your friends that you came along with, these are about the creepiest rooms on the tour. You might want to get a shot or 2 of them in here. And I'm going to sneak in here and rewind the video for the next tour, and I'll be right back to join you, and I'll start telling you when you're ready to work. And there you go. Here we have a shot of just over the 6-sided desk. And here's one in the lobby. These are all the dark colors you come with the lobby. It makes it look like an acid trip or something. For those of you who know what I'm talking about there. And when y'all are through in here, you'd advance into the autopsy room, please. Unfortunately, we only have one thing that the original where this lovely young lady is standing is where their autopsy room was. And actually, that's where they would bring the bodies to. So I'm going to just move a bit. I'm going to have to open the door here in just a second. Thank you. And this is actually where the dissection table was, but this is not the original dissection table. Now, as I said, when the Crescent was built, the lower level down here was originally the kitchens. This was the walk-in cooler right here. Back in Victorian times, of course, they didn't have refrigeration, so they buy these big, huge blocks of ice and stick them in there. It was insulated with cork, and this is where they put their meat, their dairy products, things that were perishable they needed to keep a little bit longer. When Mr. Baker took over, and he turned this into the morgue. Here's one of the more despicable things Mr. Baker did when people would check into his clinic. He would have them sign their names at the bottom of a blank piece of paper or two. And then, long after they had gone to the asylum, even after they died, he'd have his staff type up a letter on that piece of paper and send it to their relatives or whoever was paying for the stay here. And it would say something along the lines of, I can tell my tumor has shrunk. I know I'm getting better. The cure is really working. Please send more money so I can complete the cure and be whole and healthy again. So he would do this even after the people died. He'd get more money from the families that way. And he would release the bodies eventually, but until he released them, this is where you keep them here in the cooler, in the walk-in cooler. When he did release them, we had 2 funeral homes in town at the time, City Morgue and a private funeral home here on top of the mountain. He would always send the bodies to the private funeral home because he'd get a kickback from the funeral home as well. Actually, people do think he owned part of it. We're not sure. We know he got money from it, though. So even after his patients died here, he was still getting money from them. So as a climax of the tour, those of you that want to, nobody is required to certainly, we'll let you go in here. We turn off the light and close the door, and you can experience the entire creepiness yourself. I will be standing right here, and if you're ready to come out before I open the door, which won't be long, knock on it or say, please let us out, and I'll be glad to let you out. I also have a couple of ground rules. No grabbing anybody or startling anybody or loud noises. College kids on spring break, I'd say do whatever you wanted in there. But it can freak other people out. Please respect the other people on the tour, okay? Also, just as a suggestion, maybe leave your phone lights off for about the count of 5 or 10 so you get the whole experience in the dark there. Then turn them on. This has been a great spot where people have caught orbs, and the only mist caught on one of my tours was actually taken in there when I locked everybody in. So, I will ask for silence here. I've got one little cheesy haunted house effect we have here that actually came with the place. We didn't even do this.